A crystal chandelier breathes fractured light across the marble floor as she steps into the ballroom. Her heels click against polished stone too loud. She thinks as if announcing her solitude to every stranger gathered under the vaulted ceiling. She is neither late nor early, only perfectly misaligned with the others who lean into each other. Their laughter, a private dialect she can't decipher. Her dress is a muted shade of blue that once seemed elegant, but here feels as if it's trying too hard to fade into the background. She clutches the embossed invitation, fingertips grazing the gold-foiled names she once thought she'd utter in a different context. The bride's veil rustles in the distance, a wave of tulle that draws every eye but hers. She doesn't look, she can't. Near the center of the room, a white-clothed table stands half-occupied. She moves toward it, feeling the slow heat of observation following her. She is a quiet disruption, a reminder that love does not always arrive in pairs. As she sits, her chair scrapes a discordant note against the floor. She smooths her skirt, trying to anchor herself. From this vantage, the wedding is a pageant, the couple framed in candlelight, the air perfumed with lilies that dawn teak-white mask the undertone of expensive cologne and old resentment. She wonders how long she will have to stay before it is polite to leave. A waiter passes by with a silver tray of champagne flutes. She declines with a shake of her head that feels brittle. She doesn't trust her hands to hold anything without betraying the tremor inside her. Instead, she folds them in her lap, studying the pale half-moons. Her nails press into her skin. Beyond the towering centerpiece, the groom shifts his weight. For a flickering moment, his eyes find hers, then slide past as though the contact never happened. She is not surprised. She is a footnote in his story, an unfinished sentence neither of them wants to complete. Somewhere near the entrance, a door opens. A hush ripples through the guests, a pause so subtle it feels like the room is taking a single, careful breath, but she doesn't turn. She is too busy keeping herself from dissolving into the velvet hush of her own isolation. A pale pink envelope lies hidden in her purse. She doesn't have the courage to open it tonight. Instead, she rests her hand over its weight, feeling the shape of words she can't bring herself to read. The chandelier flickers overhead, casting a brief shudder of shadow across her cheek. A question curls at the edge of her mind. If he had asked once, only once would she have said yes. She doesn't allow herself to answer. The camera lingers on her face as she exhales, her gaze fixed on nothing. And somewhere, beyond the gilded doors, tomorrow waits with all the promises she never dared to claim. She feels the hours stretching ahead like an elegant sentence, with no punctuation, no escape. At the table, the linen is pressed so precisely it seems almost cruel, the cutlery aligned in silent rebuke of her presence. A small place card rests at the edge of her setting, her name written in looping script she doesn't recognize. Around her, the hum of polite conversation continues, each voice smoothing over her absence of companionship. A woman in sequined navy glances at her with something like pity, before quickly averting her eyes. Another guest leans in to whisper behind a manicured hand. The words don't carry across the table, but their meaning is unmistakable. Why is she here alone? She folds her napkin and unfolds it again, wishing she could fold herself into something smaller. The chair beside her remains conspicuously empty, the vacancy like a sigh no one dares to acknowledge. She forces herself to look up, to smile at the passing servers, to pretend she belongs among the easy laughter and measured toasts. Her gaze skims the dance floor. The newlyweds stand at its center, framed by soft, golden light that feels too perfect to bear. The bride tilts her head back in a gesture so tender that it bruises something inside her she thought had long since healed. She looks away quickly, as though she has trespassed on a moment she was never meant to witness. A waiter approaches to refill her water glass. She murmurs a thank you and stares into the clear liquid, hoping it might reflect some other version of herself, someone braver, someone who doesn't feel like an afterthought at a celebration she once imagined as her own. She wonders what he would say if he could see her now, whether he would feel regret or simply relief that she is contained neatly at the edge of the festivities, silent and unthreatening. A slender hand sets down a fresh arrangement of roses at the table's center. The petals are white, edged with the palest blush, almost translucent in the candlelight. One stem bends under its own weight, its head drooping, as if too weary to hold itself upright. She can't help thinking it looks like an apology no one had the courage to make. Somewhere behind her, the band begins to play a slow waltz. Couples rise, the fabric of their dresses whispering against polished shoes as they glide onto the floor. She stays seated, her hands folded in her lap, counting the beats like a penance. It is only when she dares to lift her eyes that she realizes the groom is watching her. For a moment so brief it feels stolen. His expression softens, a flicker of something that could be sorrow, or memory, or both. Then he looks away, turning back to the woman he has chosen. A sigh she didn't know she was holding leaves her, and the table feels even colder for it. Her name is called once, softly, by the MC, as part of a list of acknowledgments. She inclines her head in response, feeling her cheeks warm. A handful of polite applause follows, a perfunctory gesture that leaves her more hollow than before. At her feet, the hem of her dress pools like a shadow she can't step out of. She wonders how long she can pretend she hasn't noticed the empty chair beside her. She draws her fingertip along the rim of her glass, listening to the faint, mournful note it produces. The sound feels like a question she has no answer for. And in that moment, she understands that the worst kind of loneliness is the one that arrives, dressed in celebration, draped in candlelight and soft music. She becomes aware of the whispers before she fully understands they are about her. A pair of women in matching chiffon gowns pass close to her table, their conversation dropping to a murmur that sharpens the air. One tilts her head in a deliberate gesture, and though their words are too low to catch, the shape of them is clear. Pity, speculation, a gentle disdain. She lowers her gaze, pretending to adjust her bracelet. It slides too easily on her wrist, the metal cold against skin gone warm with embarrassment. The voices retreat, replaced by a tide of laughter that rises and falls in practiced waves. Beyond the archway, a corridor glows with low amber light. She watches shadows drifting across the threshold, silhouettes of guests moving between the ballroom and the adjoining reception area. For an instant, she imagines herself slipping out with them, disappearing into the anonymity of the hallway. But her feet remain rooted to the polished floor, her body unwilling to betray her fragile composure. A server glides past, balancing a tray of delicate odds. She declines again, her voice steady, only because she has rehearsed this refusal in her mind. She is not hungry. Hunger feels like a distant memory, eclipsed by the bright ache of visibility. The MC's voice floats above the crowd, announcing the next toast. Glasses lift in unison, a shimmer of crystal that catches in her throat like unshed tears. She forces herself to look around the table. Most of the seats are filled, now old classmates, colleagues of the groom, distant cousins she met once at a holiday gathering. Their faces turn toward the dais, their expressions composed, faintly expectant. None of them meet her eyes. She is grateful for it. Grateful not to have to answer the question they, Dan T, have to ask. Why did she come alone? At the far end of the ballroom, the bride's father rises for his speech. His voice is deep and measured, each word wrapped in the kind of affection that feels foreign to her ears. He speaks of childhood adventures, of lessons learned and promises made, of the way love is both a risk and an inheritance. She traces the condensation on her glass, her fingertip leaving a delicate, evaporating trail. For a moment, she lets herself drift backward in memory to the summer, she thought. This man might one day be her father-in-law. To the evenings she sat across from him, imagining a future that now feels impossibly naive. A wave of quiet applause ripples through the room as the speech concludes. She lifts her head and tries to join in, her hands coming together in a gesture that feels both too late and too loud. Movement at the ballroom entrance catches her eye. A tall figure steps inside, his posture easy but alert. He wears a dark tuxedo, perfectly tailored, and a watch that glints beneath the cuff of his shirt. His hair is just slightly tousled, as if he has stepped from a world with different rules someplace where solitude is a choice rather than a verdict. For a moment, their eyes meet across the crowded room. The contact is brief, a single stroke of awareness that makes her breath catch. She looks down again, her heart stirring in a way she can't quite name. She doesn't recognize him, and yet something about his gaze feels familiar, subtle, almost imperceptible recognition. The band begins a new song, a lilting melody that threads through the tables. The man moves forward, weaving between guests with unhurried confidence. As he draws closer, she realizes he is not looking for anyone else. A hush seems to follow him, though no one else appears to notice. She tells herself not to hope, not to wonder what it would mean if he were coming to sit beside her. But when he pauses at her table, at her empty chair, she cannot deny the way the moment changes the temperature of the room. He rests his hand lightly on the back of the vacant seat. The gesture is simple, almost courteous, but to her it feels like an act of quiet defiance, as though he has decided this is exactly where he belongs. A question hovers between them, unspoken but insistent, and she knows, even before he speaks, that the rest of the evening will not unfold as she imagined. The hush around them deepens, though the music carries on, a romantic swell that feels almost mocking in its sweetness. She keeps her gaze lowered, tracing the fine weave of the tablecloth, as if it can anchor her to the moment before it unravels. He doesn't sit immediately. For a moment, he simply studies her, the ghost of a smile playing at the corner of his mouth. She dares a glance upward, and the eye contact crackles like static, impossible to ignore, impossible to sustain. He inclines his head in a courteous greeting, his voice low and careful. "Is this seat taken?" The question is ordinary, but it rings with something heavier, some private recognition she doesn't yet understand. She opens her mouth to respond, but finds her throat too tight for words. Instead, she gestures with a small shake of her head, her hand brushing the empty chair. He slides into it with deliberate calm, as though there is no reason this moment should feel any different from the rest. But she feels the shape of it, the way her solitude has shifted, the invisible line that separates before from after. She becomes aware of other eyes glancing in their direction. The bridesmaid in lavender, the older woman at the next table, the usher standing near the dance floor. Their curiosity drifts over her like a fine mist she can't brush away. He seems impervious to it. He lifts his glass of water, taking a measured sip before he speaks again. Weddings can be overwhelming. The understatement is so gentle, she almost laughs. But there's no ridicule in his tone, only a quiet understanding that makes her chest ache. She finds her voice at last, though it comes out softer than she intends. Yes, they can. A silence settles between them, but it isn't the brittle kind that marked the earlier part of the evening. This one feels suspended, almost expectant. The candle nearest to them flutters, its flame bending in a draft neither of them can feel. She watches the way the light gilds the edge of his profile, the subtle lines near his eyes, the faint shadow beneath his jaw. He sets down his glass, folding his hands neatly on the table. She notices, for the first time, the watch he wears, an antique piece with a cracked leather strap. It looks incongruous against the flawless tuxedo, a detail so human it steals her breath. When he speaks again, it is not a question, but a recollection delivered in a tone that suggests he has been carrying it for longer than he cares to admit. I knew him when we were boys, the groom, her fingers still against the stem of her glass. The confession feels like the click of a lock turning in some hidden door. You did, she asks, careful to keep her voice from betraying more than polite interest. He nods, his gaze drifting past her to some memory she cannot see. Years ago, he was different then. We both were. A soft chord from the band draws their attention to the dance floor. The bride laughs, her head tipped back against the groom's shoulder. The sight lands with an unexpected pang. She forces herself to look away, only to find his eyes on her again, steady, unflinching. He doesn't say what they both know, that she was never simply a guest here, that the empty chair beside her was once meant for someone who chose to fill it elsewhere. The thought feels like a wound reopening, but his presence is a balm she doesn't know how to accept. In the pause that follows, she catches a glimpse of his hand as it drops to rest on his knee. There, circling the base of his ring finger, is a thin, pale indentation, a mark left by a band that is no longer there. The symbol glows in her mind, a sign that he, too, has arrived carrying the debris of something unfinished. Her heart stutters, torn between relief and the ache of recognition. Somewhere beyond the dance floor, a door closes with a soft click. She wonders if it is the sound of her past receding or something else entirely. When she meets his gaze again, she can no longer pretend she is untouched by the simple fact of him sitting here. For several breaths, neither of them speaks. The music unfurls in silken strands across the ballroom, wrapping the dancers in a haze of gentle romance she can't quite enter. She studies her hands in her lap, the way her fingers interlace so tightly the knuckles pale. When he finally breaks the silence, his voice is almost an apology. I hope you don't mind me sitting here. Her answer comes before she has time to measure it. No, I don't mind. It is the first true thing she has said all evening. He exhales, as though some quiet tension has unspooled. That perhaps he, too, was searching the room for a place that didn't feel like exile. The bride and groom finish their dance, bowing to polite applause. The bride's bouquet glows pale against her bodice, a perfect arrangement that seems more artifact than flower. As the couple drifts back to their table, she notices how the groom's hand falls away from the bride's waist just a beat too soon. The detail lodges in her mind a tiny fracture in the glass of their perfection. He follows her gaze, and though he says nothing, she feels him observing the same thing. Their shared silence takes on a shape she can't name, a recognition of truths neither of them dares to voice. She turns her attention to the centerpiece between them. White roses, interspersed with baby's breath, arranged so symmetrically they seem unreal. One bloom has begun to brown at the edges, the petals curling inward in a slow surrender. He reaches out, brushing a fingertip against the stem as though testing its fragility. She watches the small gesture, feeling something unspool in her chest, a thread she didn't realize had been pulled so taut. When he speaks again, his voice is low enough that only she can hear. "He should have told you." She blinks, her throat tightening. "Told me what?" His gaze lifts to meet hers, steady and unflinching. "That you deserved more than this." The words land softly, but they cleave through her composure. For a heartbeat, she can't look away. There is no pity in his expression, only a solemn conviction that she has never seen reflected in another's eyes. She feels her heart begin to unfasten itself from old certainties. The MC announces the next course, and servers appear in a quiet choreography, setting plates of delicate food she knows she will not touch. As the scents of saffron and rosemary drift around them, she realizes she hasn't eaten since dawn. He doesn't comment on her untouched plate. Instead, he folds his napkin, sets it aside, and leans in just enough that she can smell his cologne, something clean and expensive, underscored by the faintest trace of smoke. "Would you like to step out for a moment?" he asks. The question is offered without expectation, as if he knows she could refuse, and he would not hold it against her. She glances around the room, at the polite faces turned toward the head table, at the untouched dinner cooling before her. The idea of remaining here feels suddenly impossible. She nods, almost imperceptibly. He stands and extends his hand. For an instant, she hesitates. Then she lays her fingers against his palm. The contact is startling warmth, moving up her arm in a pulse she feels everywhere. As he guides her from the table, she feels the weight of curiosity follow them, but she doesn't look back. They slip into the corridor beyond the ballroom, where the music dims to a ghost of itself and the air smells of polished wood and some floral arrangement she can identify. He releases her hand as though aware of how long he has held it. She feels the loss of contact keenly, a small ache she cannot disguise. For a while, they stand side by side, neither speaking. Somewhere behind a closed door, laughter rises in a bright swell. She closes her eyes, letting the hush of the hallway settle around her like a second skin. When she opens them again, he is watching her with an expression that feels like a question and a promise she doesn't yet have the courage to name. She draws in a breath so deep it feels almost illicit, as though she has stolen it from the world she just left behind. Out here, the air is cooler, tinged with the resinous perfume of the wood paneling and the faint, expensive cologne clinging to his lapel. He moves a pace away, giving her space she didn't realize she needed. The corridor stretches into a hush of closed doors, gilded sconces casting soft pools of light across the carpet. She tries not to imagine the ballroom just beyond the archway, the music and laughter continuing without her. He studies her with an attentiveness that is neither possessive nor intrusive. It feels almost clinical, as if he's cataloging her sadness and the shape it makes around her. Better, he asks. She nods, though she is not certain what she means by it. For a moment, neither of them speaks. She lets her gaze drift over the elaborate moldings along the ceiling, searching for something to fix her attention on. Anything but the ache curling under her ribs. He looks down, adjusting the silver cufflink at his wrist. The gesture is precise, habitual, a man accustomed to keeping his appearance immaculate. But as he lifts his sleeve, she sees it, a thin white scar along the inside of his forearm. It is an old wound, half hidden by the crisp fabric. Something about it catches her breath in her throat, a small imperfection he has never bothered to erase. She doesn't ask how it happened, but she doesn't look away either. His voice cuts softly into the hush. I should have introduced myself sooner. She blinks, startled. You know me, in a way, he says, and she can tell he is choosing his words with care. He spoke of you more than once. He doesn't have to specify who. The groom's name remains unspoken between them, like a thorn pressing lightly against skin. He did, she manages. He inclines his head, the motion almost solemn. I thought. He pauses, lips parting, as though to discard whatever he was about to say. I thought you deserved to have someone on your side tonight. Her throat closes. It is too much and too little, this simple declaration. She feels the tremor in her fingers before she sees it. She folds her arms to hide it, but the gesture feels transparent. He shifts closer, just enough that she can feel the steadiness of him, the grounded composure that makes her wonder what it would feel like to lean her weight into it. When she says nothing, he continues, his voice low. He never told you, did he, why he couldn't? She doesn't answer. The words are a raw place she can't yet touch. He studies her a moment longer, then exhales. It wasn't about you. You were never insufficient. Something breaks loose in her chest, a small, soundless collapse. Her gaze drops to the floor, to the hem of her dress pooling like a shadow. When she looks up again, she finds his eyes already waiting for hers. The band begins another song, muffled by the thick corridor walls. The melody is softer now, a waltz that feels older than any of them. I'm sorry, she whispers, though she doesn't know which apology she's making, or to whom. He shakes his head slowly. No, not tonight. He gestures down the corridor, toward a small alcove where a linen-draped table holds a crystal decanter of water and 2 delicate glasses. Would you like to sit for a moment? She hesitates, and then, because she cannot bear to return to the ballroom, she nods. They walk in measured silence. When they reach the table, he pulls out a chair for her. She lowers herself into it, feeling her heart slow to something almost bearable. As he pours water into the glasses, she notices again the indentation around his finger, where a ring once lived. She wonders what he lost him, whether that is why he can recognize her own ruins so easily. When he hands her the glass, his fingers brush hers. The contact feels deliberate this time, reassuring. She doesn't thank him. Instead, she lifts the glass to her lips, savoring the cool, clean taste, as if it were an answer to a question she hasn't asked. And for the first time that evening, she thinks she may survive it. She sets the glass down carefully, watching the last droplet of water slide down its side to disappear into the linen. Her fingers rest lightly against the base, unwilling to let go just yet. He sits across from her, his posture composed but not rigid, as though he's practiced the art of stillness. For a time, neither of them speaks. The hush between them is almost tender, a place where words might bruise rather than heal. A muffled cheer erupts from the ballroom, a signal that the cake has arrived. She doesn't need to see it to know how perfect it will be. Tiers of immaculate white frosting crowned with sugar flowers. The kind of confection she once imagined, cutting herself, hand in hand with a man whose absence now feels inevitable. She turns her head, trying to banish the image. When she looks back at him, she finds his eyes already on her, studying her as if he's memorizing the way she folds herself against disappointment. "You don't have to go back in," he says, and though the words are quiet, they feel like a reprieve. She swallows, tasting the bitterness that rises at the thought of returning to her place at the lonely table. "I know," she murmurs, almost to herself. He shifts slightly, the candlelight catching on the fine lines at the corners of his mouth. For the first time, she wonders how old he is, what history he carries behind the immaculate tuxedo and calm demeanor. "Do you remember?" he begins, voice low, "the summer after university?" The question startles her, as though he's reached into a hidden drawer of her memory. "Yes," she says slowly. "Why, that was when he first mentioned you." Her breath hitches. "He did." He nods. "He was different then, more certain about what he wanted. He spoke about you as if you were already part of his life, as inevitable as sunrise." She looks away, blinking against the heat behind her eyes. "People change." "Yes," he agrees, "sometimes more than they should." He inclines his head, the motion almost solemn. "I thought." He pauses, lips parting, as though to discard whatever he was about to say. "I thought you deserved to have someone on your side tonight." Her throat closes. It is too much and too little, this simple declaration. She feels the tremor in her fingers before she sees it. She folds her arms to hide it, but the gesture feels transparent. He shifts closer, just enough that she can feel the steadiness of him, the grounded composure that makes her wonder what it would feel like to lean her weight into it. When she says nothing, he continues, his voice low. "He never told you, did he, why he couldn't?" She doesn't answer. The words are a raw place she can't yet touch. He studies her a moment longer, then exhales. "It wasn't about you. You were never insufficient." Something breaks loose in her chest, a small, soundless collapse. Her gaze drops to the floor, to the hem of her dress pooling like a shadow. When she looks up again, she finds his eyes already waiting for hers. The band begins another song, muffled by the thick corridor walls. The melody is softer now, a waltz that feels older than any of them. "I'm sorry," she whispers, though she doesn't know which apology she's making, or to whom. He shakes his head slowly. "No, not tonight." He gestures down the corridor, toward a small alcove where a linen-draped table holds a crystal decanter of water and two delicate glasses. "Would you like to sit for a moment?" She hesitates, and then, because she cannot bear to return to the ballroom, she nods. They walk in measured silence. When they reach the table, he pulls out a chair for her. She lowers herself into it, feeling her heart slow to something almost bearable. As he pours water into the glasses, she notices again the indentation around his finger, where a ring once lived. She wonders what he lost him, whether that is why he can recognize her own ruins so easily. When he hands her the glass, his fingers brush hers. The contact feels deliberate this time, reassuring. She doesn't thank him. Instead, she lifts the glass to her lips, savoring the cool, clean taste, as if it were an answer to a question she hasn't asked. And for the first time that evening, she thinks she may survive it. She sets the glass down carefully, watching the last droplet of water slide down its side to disappear into the linen. Her fingers rest lightly against the base, unwilling to let go just yet. He sits across from her, his posture composed but not rigid, as though he's practiced the art of stillness. For a time, neither of them speaks. The hush between them is almost tender, a place where words might bruise rather than heal. A muffled cheer erupts from the ballroom, a signal that the cake has arrived. She doesn't need to see it to know how perfect it will be. Tiers of immaculate white frosting, crowned with sugar flowers. The kind of confection she once imagined, cutting herself, hand in hand with a man whose absence now feels inevitable. She turns her head, trying to banish the image. When she looks back at him, she finds his eyes already on her, studying her as if he's memorizing the way she folds herself against disappointment. "You don't have to go back in," he says, and though the words are quiet, they feel like a reprieve. She swallows, tasting the bitterness that rises at the thought of returning to her place at the lonely table. "I know," she murmurs, almost to herself. He shifts slightly, the candlelight catching on the fine lines at the corners of his mouth. For the first time, she wonders how old he is, what history he carries behind the immaculate tuxedo and calm demeanor. "Do you remember?" he begins, voice low, "the summer after university?" The question startles her, as though he's reached into a hidden drawer of her memory. "Yes," she says slowly. "Why, that was when he first mentioned you." Her breath hitches. "He did." He nods. "He was different then, more certain about what he wanted. He spoke about you as if you were already part of his life, as inevitable as sunrise." She looks away, blinking against the heat behind her eyes. "People change." "Yes," he agrees, "sometimes more than they should." She lowers her gaze to the table. A single petal has fallen from the arrangement, pale ivory, curling inward like something shy. She lifts it between her fingers, marveling at how fragile it feels. "Did you ever think," she asks quietly, "that you'd be here like this, that any of us would?" He huffs a breath that is almost a laugh. "Not once." Her lips tilt, though it doesn't feel quite like a smile. "Me neither." The ballroom doors open again. A server steps into the corridor, carrying a tray lined with champagne flutes. The golden liquid glints in the candlelight. She expects the man to offer them drinks, but he only nods politely and moves on, as though sensing they are not ready to be returned to celebration. When the hush closes around them again, it feels deliberate, in agreement. They will stay here as long as they must. He shifts slightly, his knee brushing hers beneath the table. The contact is so brief she might pretend it never happened, but her skin warms where they touched. She doesn't move away. "I've been thinking," he begins, voice so low she has to lean in to hear, "about how we're always taught that love is a destination, as if you arrive there and everything stops needing effort." She watches him, waiting, but it doesn't, he says. "It just changes shape, and sometimes it ends before you're ready to stop believing in it." Her fingers tighten around the petal. "I thought I'd made peace with it," she whispers, "with how it ended." "Have you?" She doesn't answer. His gaze drops to her hand, where the petal rests against her palm. "Maybe peace isn't something you make all at once," he says. "Maybe it's just the moments when you don't feel like you re-drowning anymore." She studies his face, searching for evidence that he's simply trying to console her. But he looks almost surprised by his own words, as though they came from some place he can't name. The ballroom swells with applause, then quiets. She imagines the bride and groom cutting their cake, the careful choreography of perfect slices and camera flashes. For the first time, she doesn't feel the sting of being absent. "I'm sorry," she says softly, though she doesn't know if she means for her own disappointment or for the fact that he understands it too well. His lips curve in a rueful, almost private smile. "So am I." Outside the tall windows, dusk has deepened into true night. She can just make out the line of cypress trees beyond the terrace, their branches motionless against a sky the color of slate. "Do you want to leave?" he asks. Her heart flutters at the question, not with fear, but with something like relief. "Not yet," she says. He inclines his head, accepting this answer, as though it's the most reasonable thing in the world. And when she looks at him again, she feels the first, tentative understanding that maybe tonight isn't about what she lost, but about what remains possible here in this quiet between endings and beginnings. They sit in the corridor long enough for the music behind the doors to change again. The waltz fades, replaced by a slower, more plaintive melody that she does not recognize. In this hush, it feels like a song for people who have outlasted their illusions. He shifts, his shoulder brushing hers in a touch too natural to be awkward. When she glances at him, he's studying the space ahead, as though he can see something unfolding there. "I used to think," he begins, "that there were only two kinds of endings, the ones you chose and the ones that chose you." She doesn't speak. His voice has taken on a quality she doesn't want to interrupt, a current pulling them somewhere neither of them planned. "But then," he continues, "I realized most endings are neither. They just happen. Because you don't say the thing you should, or because you wait a day too long to decide. Her breath catches, and you regret it." His jaw tightens, but he doesn't look away. Every day, the confession lands between them like a fragile artifact. She wonders if it costs him something to offer it. "I think," she pauses, unsure of her footing, "I think I still believed there would be time, that someday he would call, or show up, or explain." The ache in her chest feels old and new all at once. He studies her with an empathy that feels unguarded. "You deserved more than silence." Her eyes burn. She looks down at her hands, her palms pale against the dark linen of her dress. "So did you." The quiet is deep and forgiving. After a moment, he exhales slowly, as if releasing something he's been carrying too long. "Would you like some air?" "Yes," she says, without hesitation. He stands first, offering his hand. She hesitates only an instant before taking it. The contact feels different, no longer tentative, but steady, necessary. They move together down the corridor, past the closed doors and framed photographs. At the far end, a set of French doors opens onto a stone terrace. He pushes them open with a quiet authority, and she follows him into the night. The air is sharp with the scent of cypress and cooling stone. She draws in a breath, feeling it clear the last remnants of candle smoke and perfume from her lungs. Above them, the sky is a deep, unwavering black, scattered with a smattering of indifferent stars. The terrace stretches wide and empty, as though set aside for them alone. He releases her hand only when they stop near the balustrade. She rests her palms on the cool stone, feeling the solidity of it beneath her skin. "It's beautiful," she murmurs. "It is," he agrees. But when she looks at him, he's watching her instead of the view. "You know," he says softly, "I think he always believed he was protecting you by not choosing." She closes her eyes. "And he was wrong." "Yes." When she looks at him again, she feels something shifts, some old bitterness she hadn't realized was still lodged beneath her ribs. I don't want to spend the rest of my life waiting for an explanation, she says. The words surprise her with their certainty. You shouldn't, he replies, just as steady. She studies his face, the way the moonlight carves gentle hollows along his cheekbones, or someone still capable of beginning again. A breeze stirs the hem of her dress, lifting it against her ankles. She lets it move her without resistance. His hand comes to rest on the balustrade beside hers, close but not touching. She nods, though she doesn't yet know when that will be. For now, the night feels wide enough to hold the unfinished parts of her story and his, and that, she thinks, might be enough. They remain at the balustrade, their shoulders nearly touching as the night settles deeper around them. But out here, the world feels clean, stripped of ceremony and expectation. She breathes in the cool air, feeling it steady her. Every inhalation seems to loosen a knot she hadn't noticed, until her chest feels almost light. He is silent beside her, his presence an unspoken permission to let the moment be whatever it needs to be. For a long while, they simply stand there, listening to the muted echoes of celebration drifting across the terrace. At last, she draws her hands away from the stone railing. Her fingers are cold, but she doesn't mind. The chill feels honest in a way the ballroom never did. He glances at her, one brow lifted in a question he doesn't voice. Do you ever wonder, she says softly, how many lives you could have lived if you'd just turned left instead of right one day? His mouth curves in something that isn't quite a smile. All the time, her gaze drifts to his hands. The faint indentation around his ring finger seems more pronounced here, under the candid light of the stars. She doesn't ask what happened, though curiosity flickers at the edges of her restraint. And she hears the care in his voice, like someone easing open a door that has been locked a long time. He shifts so he's facing her fully. The night air ruffles a strand of her hair against her cheek, and he watches it move before lifting his eyes again. We were together for 7 years, long enough that I thought that was it, the life I'd build everything around. She doesn't interrupt, though her chest tightens in recognition of that kind of certainty. She left in winter, he continues. There wasn't a fight, no affair, just quiet. She said she'd forgotten how to love me without feeling like she'd disappeared. A gust of wind lifts the hem of her dress again. She holds her arms against herself, not from the cold, but because she doesn't know where else to put them. I'm sorry, she whispers. He shakes his head. You don't need to be. A silence settles, and in it, she feels the strange relief that comes when someone shares the shape of their own heartbreak. It makes her own feel less singular, less isolating. He exhales, slow and deliberate. After she left, I thought if I kept moving, if I stayed busy, eventually I'd stop feeling the lack of her. And did you? He hesitates, then lifts his gaze to hers, honest in a way she has rarely seen. No, her throat tightens. I don't think it works like that, she says. No, he agrees. I don't think it does. The faint sound of laughter rises behind the curtains. She imagines the guests leaning across tables, glasses raised in celebration of a story she is no longer part of. Do you regret coming tonight? She asks. He studies her, as if considering how much truth to share. Because I would have never known you were here. Her heart stumbles over itself at the simplicity of the statement. You didn't have to sit with me, she says. I know, he replies, but I wanted to. Something in her loosens again, the smallest fracture in the wall she has built around her hope. A breeze carries the scent of lilies from the ballroom, mingled with the faint bite of cold stone. She realizes she is shivering only when he lifts his hand, pausing in silent question before draping his jacket over her shoulders. The fabric is warm from his body, and she pulls it tighter, feeling the unfamiliar weight of someone else's care. "Thank you," she says, her voice smaller than she intends. He doesn't answer, but the quiet between them feels steadier now. She watches a moth flutter against the glass of the nearest lantern, drawn to the light even as it scorches the edges of its wings. "We should go back in," she says eventually, though she doesn't move. "Whenever you're ready." The moment holds, delicate and unresolved, as though neither of them quite dares to decide what comes next. And for now, that is enough. They stand together on the terrace as the lantern's glow flickers across their faces, casting uncertain shadows. She holds the lapels of his jacket closed around her, feeling the warmth of it seep slowly into her skin. The ballroom windows remain lit behind the curtains, but she feels no urgency to return. Out here, the air feels truer, less perfumed by ceremony and old expectations. He looks down at her hands, still knotted tight around the fabric. "You don't have to be brave," he says softly. "I'm not," she answers. "I'm just here." He nods as though he understands perfectly. Perhaps he does. A movement inside the ballroom draws her eye. Through the narrow gap in the curtains, she glimpses the bride standing alone near the head table. Her veil gathered in one hand like a length of gauze, she no longer knows what to do with. The groom is nowhere in sight. Somehow, that imager woman in white, alone amid the celebration, makes her throat tighten more than any memory has tonight. She looks away quickly, focusing on the cool stone beneath her palms. "I don't want to envy her," she says after a moment, her voice low. "I don't want to be that person." "Then don't," he replies. "You're allowed to feel everything without letting it turn you bitter." The certainty in his tone surprises her. "Is that what you did?" He hesitates. "Some days I do better than others." A quiet laugh escapes her, dry but genuine. She tips her head back to look at the stars, as though searching for something to believe in that doesn't belong to anyone else. When she looks at him again, she sees that he is watching her with that same unflinching steadiness. "I thought tonight would undo me," she confesses. "That I'd have to sit there until it was over and pretend I was fine. You don't have to pretend with me." The words slip between them like a promise. She doesn't know if she can trust it yet, but she wants to. She winces. "I know. Did it change anything about who you are?" She looks down at her hands, pale and unadorned, where they rest against the balustrade. Her nails are short, neatly filed, unpainted. The last time she bothered to color them was the week she still believed she would be the bride. "No," she admits. "Then let them wonder," he says, quiet but certain. "It's not your responsibility to satisfy their curiosity." She feels it settle in her chest, a kind of fragile relief that makes her almost dizzy. "I wish I had your certainty," she murmurs. He shifts so that he's facing her fully. "It isn't certainty," he says. "It's just practice." She blinks, surprised. "Practice. Learning to live with the questions," he clarifies. "The ones that don't have satisfying answers." Her throat tightens. "And does it get easier?" He hesitates, then lifts one shoulder in a slow, honest shrug. "Some days." The admission makes her feel lighter, as if she's been granted permission to be unfinished. She studies his face in the lantern, glow fine lines beside his eyes, the quiet gravity in the set of his mouth. He looks like someone who has lost and kept going anyway. When she lifts her gaze to meet his, she doesn't feel quite so exposed. I don't want to stay here forever, she says, meaning not just the terrace, but the place she's been trapped inside herself. You won't, he says. Promise. I can't, he answers, simply. But I'll stay as long as you need. Her breath catches, startled by the humility in the offer. He isn't trying to rescue her. He isn't asking her for anything. He is just there, and somehow that feels like the rarest gift of all. Inside, the music swells again. A more exuberant melody, this time something she might have danced to once, in another life. She doesn't look back. What did you hope would happen tonight? He considers this for a long while, his gaze drifting to the lantern by the garden path. I didn't come here expecting anything, he says, but I hoped I wouldn't feel so alone. She draws in a breath, her heart beating hard against her ribs. And do you? He meets her eyes, unflinching. No, he says quietly. Not anymore. Her vision blurs. She blinks the tears back before they can fall, not because she is ashamed, but because she wants to see him clearly. She doesn't know how long they stand like that, the night stretching around them, the music drifting in and out of reach. At last, she draws her hand free from the folds of his jacket and extends it toward him. He takes it in both of his palms, warm against her chilled skin. She closes her eyes, feeling the moment settle around them, imperfect, unresolved, and more honest than anything that waits inside the ballroom. And when she opens them again, she realizes she no longer feels like she has to pretend she is fine. They stand hand in hand as the darkness presses gently around them, neither speaking nor needing to. The ballroom glows behind the curtains, an island of celebration she no longer feels tethered to. Out here, in the quiet, there is nothing to perform. The thought is strangely liberating. She looks down at their joined hands. The contrast startles her, her smaller, colder fingers nested between his. She thinks of all the ways she has tried to make herself smaller, to occupy less space in other people's stories. Tonight feels like the first time she has allowed herself to simply exist without apology. He seems to sense her reflection, his thumb brushing lightly along the back of her hand. The touch is careful, as if he knows how easily she could pull away. But she doesn't. You look lighter, he says softly. She considers this, tilting her head to study the night sky. Maybe I am, she admits. You should be, he says. You've been carrying too much. She swallows. The truth of it feels almost unbearable in its gentleness. For a moment she lets her eyes drift shut, listening to the muffled rhythm of music and laughter. When she opens them again, she sees movement inside the ballroom, figures circling each other in slow dance, the bride resting her cheek against the groom's shoulder. Once, she would have looked away quickly, unwilling to let the sight carve into her. Now she watches without flinching, surprised by the quiet absence of envy. I thought it would hurt more, she says. It probably will, he replies, not unkindly. Tomorrow or next week, but tonight. You don't have to pretend you're unbreakable. She almost smiles. And what about you? His gaze drops to their hands. I'm not unbreakable either. The admission steadies her more than any reassurance could. She lifts her free hand to the lapel of his jacket, where it drapes her shoulders. For an instant, her fingertips brush the smooth fabric, and she thinks of all the times she has waited for someone to make her feel safe. She never expected that safety might arrive without any promise of permanence. Do you ever wish you could go back? She asks, quietly, to her. to the person you were before. He is silent for a while, long enough that she wonders if he will answer at all. I think, he says at last, I wish I could go back and tell him he was going to survive it. The softness in his voice is almost too much. She draws in a careful breath, her chest aching in a way that feels clean. You did, she says. He lifts his gaze to hers. So did you. They stand there, suspended in the hush. The garden lantern burns steadily against the darkness, illuminating the edges of the terrace. She watches the flame flicker and feels the first stirrings of something she doesn't dare to name, something that might be hope, or simply the relief of no longer pretending. She is untouched by loss. Inside, the music changes again, the melody sweet and slow. A few guests wander out onto the dance floor, their movements blurred by the gauzy curtains. She wonders if anyone has noticed she is gone. For the first time, she realizes it doesn't matter. Would you like to sit? He asks, gesturing to the stone bench along the balustrade. She nods, and he releases her hand to guide her over. When she sits, she feels the solid weight of the moment pressing into her, grounding her more completely than anything she has known in months. He settles beside her, close enough that their arms brush. She doesn't pull away. They watch the night deepen, neither speaking, and in the shared quiet, she feels something ease inside, hers some old question finally loosening its hold. After a long time, she says, I think I'm ready. He doesn't ask what she means. Instead, he nods once, as though he has been waiting for her to decide. And for the first time since she stepped into the ballroom alone, she feels certain that leaving won't mean she has failed. They rise together from the bench, neither in a hurry. The night air has turned colder, but she feels steadier under its quiet discipline. He picks up his jacket where it drapes her shoulders, as if he means to reclaim it, but instead he only folds the collar gently and settles it more securely around her. The gesture is so unassuming, so free of expectation, that her throat tightens. She rests her hands over the lapels, grounding herself in the warmth he has offered. For once, she does not feel the urge to apologize for taking up space in someone else's evening. Beyond the terrace, the last of the guests have begun drifting toward their cars. She watches them through the open French doors, women gathering their skirts, men tugging at starched collars, laughter still blooming even as the celebration dissolves into departure. I thought I'd feel emptier when it ended, she murmurs. And do you? She takes a moment to be honest with herself. No, she says quietly, I don't. He studies her profile, as though memorizing this version of Hertha, woman who has stayed long enough to find her own ending. A hush falls between them, but it feels companionable now, complete. You know, he says, his voice low, there's something you should know. She turns her head, her heart stumbling over itself. What is it? He hesitates, as if searching for the right shape of the truth. That night, he ended it with you. He called me. Her breath catches. Why? He was afraid you would think he didn't love you, he says slowly. Afraid you'd think it was about you not being enough. Her vision blurs as she tries to process this. And was it? No. He meets her gaze, unwavering. He was afraid of how much he did. The words land like a soft impact, too gentle to bruise, but strong enough to unseat her certainty. I don't know if that makes it better, she whispers. It doesn't have to, he says. It's just what was true for him. She draws in a slow, careful breath. In all the months since, she never allowed herself to consider that some endings aren't made of anger or betrayal, but of fear and the simple human failure to be brave enough. For a moment she doesn't speak. The hush stretches between them, deeper than any apology or explanation. At last, she lifts her hand to her cheek, wiping the tears she hadn't noticed falling. "Thank you for telling me." He inclines his head. "You deserved to know." A breeze moves through the cypress trees at the edge of the garden. She listens to it whisper through the branches, thinking how strange it is that sorrow and relief can occupy the same space without canceling each other out. She looks at him, really looks, taking in the man who has stayed by her side all evening without expecting anything in return. "You didn't have to be the one to sit with me," she says softly. "I know, but I'm glad you did." The smallest smile touches his mouth. "So am I." They stand side by side, watching the last of the guests disappear into the dark. The music inside has finally gone quiet, leaving only the hush of night and the slow settling of what can't be changed. "I don't want to keep wearing this," she says, her hand brushing the jacket. He nods. "You don't have to." But she doesn't shrug it off yet. Instead, she lets it rest around her shoulders, a reminder that even in the midst of endings, there are moments of unexpected grace. They begin walking back toward the doors, not because she feels ready to rejoin the celebration, but because she understands at last that she doesn't have to belong to it anymore. And as they cross the threshold, she feels something inside her shift in acceptance that she has survived the worst of it. The ballroom is quieter now, drained of its earlier clamor. Half the candles have burned down to stubs, their wax cooling in pale rivulets along polished silver. A few servers move discreetly among the tables, collecting forgotten napkins and half-empty glasses. She pauses just inside the doorway, the hush of the terrace still clinging to her skin like a second memory. For a moment, she is afraid the old ache will surge back, that the sight of the room, where she was so conspicuously alone, will undo everything she has managed to gather together in herself tonight. But it doesn't. Instead, she feels something like compassion for the woman who sat here hours ago, rigid with dread and hope she couldn't name. For the woman who thought that surviving this evening would mean pretending none of it mattered. She doesn't feel that way anymore. He stands beside her, his jacket still settled across her shoulders. In the soft, waning light, his face looks both familiar and new, as though she has only just begun to see him clearly. "Are you all right?" he asks, his voice low enough that no one else can hear. She lifts her gaze to his. "Yes," she says, and for once, she doesn't have to wonder if it's true. They move together past the tables, their steps unhurried. No one stops them. A few guests glance up, curiosity flickering across tired faces, but no one asks where they've been. It feels like a small mercy she doesn't take for granted. At the edge of the dance floor, she hesitates. The bride and groom are no longer in sight. The last handful of guests are gathered near the bar, their laughter subdued now, tinged with the sweetness of endings. She turns to him, her hand lifting instinctively to return his jacket, but he shakes his head. "Keep it, at least until you get home." Her fingers tighten on the lapel. "I don't know how to thank you," she says softly. "You don't have to, but I want to." He studies her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he says, very gently, "Then remember you didn't come through this alone." Her throat aches at the tenderness in the words. "I will," she whispers. He glances toward the doorway, as though offering her the choice of how to leave this place. For once, she feels she has one. she turns back to the room, letting her gaze linger over the evidence of celebration, the empty champagne flutes, the crumpled napkins, the flower petals scattered like bright confetti across the floor. It doesn't hurt to see it anymore. She draws in a breath that feels astonishingly clear. When she steps away from the dance floor, she does it without hesitation. He falls into step beside her, and together they cross the ballroom for the last time. At the threshold, she pauses. She doesn't look back. The night air meets her with the same cool honesty she first felt on the terrace. She tips her head up to the sky, and for a moment she simply stands there, her heart steady in a way she almost doesn't recognize. He waits a respectful distance away, neither leading nor urging her forward. When she meets his eyes, she sees the same gentle question there he asked when he first sat beside her. Is this seat taken? And she understands, finally, that some questions don't need answers to change everything. She moves toward him, not because she needs rescuing, but because she wants to. As they walk together down the long drive, the gravel crunching under their shoes, she feels the night folding around them, finished, unresolved, and perfectly hers. Does this story remind you of something in your own life? Share your thoughts in the comments. And if you're still here, thank you. Subscribe, because the next story could be closer than you think.